My backstory, I spent 10 years working at Microsoft, and interviewing badly, as the slide reminds me, and I tried everything I could to pass an interview. What I found was the more times that I interviewed and the harder I tried, the worse I did in the interviews. Anybody here feel kind of the same way? Like you think you finally figured it out? Oh, okay, now they ask me that question, I'll go back home and I'll memorize it, look it up on the internet, and I'll be ready for that answer the next time they ask me that question. Well, it didn't result in what I wanted to, it didn't result in me getting hired for the positions that I wanted, but I ended up getting the positions that I didn't want in those, for those jobs. And over the last 3 years, I've interviewed about, I think it's about 2,000 candidates, but I kind of stopped counting at 1,700. I don't know why one would stop at 17 and not keep going at that point. But also, my responsibility was to interview managers to qualify their requirements for their positions so that I could take over part of the interview process for those managers. And that resulted in me interviewing just tons and tons of candidates across all scales, from test to dev to SQL database, architect, database engineer, performance analysis, tuning DBAs, all those kind of things. Also program managers and some executive positions. So this is what I've learned. Okay, let me ask you guys, the goal of the interview, is it to get the job? Are you there to get a job?
An offer for a job.
Okay, to get an offer for a job. Okay, so you feel like there's some motivation that success means in the interview means that if you've done well, you'll get an offer for the position or you'll get a job at the company? Okay.
No, to see if it matches what you want.
Yeah. I go to interviews to get information about the position. So I always take it as a two-way street. I want to know what kind of position it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had interviews where I've terminated and saying I don't know the position.
Okay, so if you did want the position, then if you didn't get an offer, does that mean that you failed somehow?
No, it just means you're not a good fit for whatever it is that they're looking for.
Okay. What was that?
Yeah, that you failed, but there's somebody better than you.
Okay. Okay, this is good. So one of the traps that I fell into was I thought that I should be able to pass every interview that I go on. I thought that there's a perfect way to interview. If you have all the answers, that you'll get hired. And it's not really what happens. So my answer to this question is no, you're not there to get a job. And to understand this, we need to examine two qualities of the interview and kind of what's affecting the whole reason why the position is open in the first place. So we need to understand why is the position opened in the first place, and then we need to understand how the hiring manager makes their hiring decision. So we'll quickly go through this before we get on to some of the other strategies. So first here is, why is the position opened in the first place? I'll throw this out there. Why?
There's some work that has to get done, and some company needs someone to go do the work.
Okay.
Somebody else has left.
Okay.
Or
Excellent.
back.
Great. So somebody left, there's work to be done, and there's not enough people to do it. Great. Any other motivations, reasons why managers open positions? No? Okay. Let's see if you got...
Some people open positions to test the market and see what sorts of talent are out there to help guide future business decisions.
Right, actually. That's...
Not necessarily a laudable practice, but some companies do that without the intention of hiring the people that they interview.
Yeah, that's strange, isn't it? That you think you're going out on an interview, but they have no intention of actually hiring you for the position.
There's no intention of actually hiring anybody.
Yeah, anybody.
And you
right.
start to hear through the grapevine that they're interviewing everybody. We never hired anybody. And another reason I've seen, sadly, is to retain budget.
Mm-hmm.
Or to gather information about competitors.
Mm-hmm.
But that's unusual. And usually it's because they want to hire somebody.
Well, I qualify the, part of what this whole interview prep kind of is based on is, one, the team is understaffed. We don't have enough people to do the work that we need. Second, the project is behind schedule. If we had more time, we could afford not to hire somebody, and we could just work those, that longer time to get the work done. So with considering these 2 points here, the issue here is the risk of the project failure is high. And the managers open the position because they want to make sure that the project is going to be successful. If they don't hire somebody into the position, they're at risk for failure. I mean, if the project wasn't at risk, would we hire somebody? Would we need to open up a position? Would we need to burn money? Is that necessary? Maybe in a government position, that's necessary. But okay, so I want to talk about ownership of risk then, because the risk to the project's success is high. Now, what are the possible outcomes of the interview?
Getting a job or not getting a job? Or
Oh.
for the, or are you talking about the manager?
No, for you as a candidate. Yeah. So I want to say here that, yeah, the hiring decision is not a binary decision. The process the manager goes through to qualify you and their decision to hire you or not isn't about whether or not you get the job or you don't. To the candidate, it looks like it is, because it looks like a binary decision, but it's really not. And in fact, it has to do with the risk. See, the hiring manager's decision to hire you is based on, here is the decision is an exercise in risk assessment, but really the decision to hire you is based on how much risk the manager needs to own to extend you an offer for the position. Now, this is key. For me, I never looked at it from the manager's perspective. I always looked at it from my own, thinking, I'm here to get a job. In fact, I'm not even part of the equation. If you really look at it for this, if this is all set here, the decision to hire you is based on how much risk the manager needs to own to consider you for the position, what is the goal of the interview? Exactly. So the goal here is to mitigate the risk the manager needs to own to consider you for the position. Now, the things we're going to go to next in the rest of the slides address this. But again, I'm trying to move you from thinking of the interview process as the goal is to get the job, and instead look at it from the manager's perspective. Because if you and the manager are speaking the same language, you'll be communicating, you'll be able to take on part of the hiring process from that manager. You'll already kind of be doing your role in the company to facilitate success on that project by helping him make the decision. And I'll say here that the interview success, it's not about the offer. The interview is not about you. It's about something else. And I've already said it, but I want to hear from you guys. If the interview isn't about you, what is it about?
Mitigation of risk. But how do you know what the manager's risks, what his assessment of risk is?
You don't. You don't, and you don't need to. So, and we'll get into why that's not important for you to know what the risks are. In fact, you'll never know what the risks are. Have you ever interviewed for a position that you were totally qualified for, but you didn't get an offer in that position? Raise your hands, yeah? Mm-hmm. Excellent. Have you ever interviewed for a position that you didn't meet all of the requirements, but you still got an offer? The position? Excellent. Okay. So it's not necessary to know everything, and their decision is based on so many other factors. It might be where they currently are in their project life cycle. It might be that they've had the position open too long and they just need anybody. It might be that the position opened yesterday and they're willing to wait 3 months before they really have to make a decision. So they're going to look for the perfect candidate until time runs out. Well, that even confuses things, because as a candidate, if you interviewing today for a position, you might get a different result interviewing 2 months from now for the exact same position. That's absolutely possible. So I want to back up here too to say, for 10 years I beat myself up, if that's the right way to say it, but I would get out of interviews feeling completely demoralized. A small person. Why do I even work at Microsoft? Why do they even give me a job? How can they even pay me for what I do? Because I would interview for positions that I was doing as a contractor, and I was looking to go permanent in that same role. They wouldn't hire me permanent, but they paid double whatever the costs were for a contractor more.
What reasons were you given why you were not hired?
Yeah.
Not what were the reasons really, but what were you told?
it would, I actually know the real reasons why I wasn't, and we'll be going over that. And with some of the things, I'll preface this by saying that some of the things I wasn't able to do in the interview was to communicate what my skills were and what my experience was. I spent a lot of time trying to second guess what the manager wanted me to say. I tried reading their body language. I tried, thinking that guessing in the interview was a really good skill set, But let me throw this at you. How many projects have you been on that were successful? Were successful because the teams were made up of really good guessers. I don't know. I've never been on a team where the people were made up of really good guessers. Companies that are successful aren't made up of people who just guess. Instead, they're people who can qualify requirements. They can understand the requirements. They can, they don't take it upon themselves to think that that's their responsibility. Yet when I'd get in the interview, if I didn't know the answer, instead of saying, I don't know, I would guess. And that was a very, very bad strategy. So that's one of the things on one of the future slides. So, so the goal is for the project to be successful. You have to have that perspective from the manager's perspective. You need to be talking that same language as with the manager. So the manager there isn't there to give you a job. You're there to help the project be successful. And what that can result is that not getting an offer might mean that the project is successful. It feels strange, and it feels like, well, wait, I need to put food on the table. I need this, I really want to do this job. I wanted to be a video game developer way before I was qualified for anybody to give me that responsibility, yet I thought they should just give me that, give me the job anyways, because I really wanted it. Well, it had nothing to do with me. So, now I want to talk about what I call the security check, where basically to look at the interview as an authentication process. One of the reasons why is because an hour is not long enough to certify you in the position. I mean, your resume, who really cares about your resume? Those are really just talking points. That's just to make sure that the manager feels confident enough that it's worth their time to bring you in. But when you get into the interview, he only has a short period of time to ask you a few set of questions in order to understand kind of the scope and depth at these different levels. Well, if there's not enough time to ask you every interview question, then that means that he's asking these pinpoint questions just to authenticate you in the position. And this is key because now we're getting, just like in any crypto operation or security operation, trust is the most important part to any security or authentication process. If the manager doesn't trust you in that position, and if he doesn't trust what you're saying to them, or if you say something that that breaks down that trust or dissolves it, you're doing way more damage to your potential of getting a job with that manager. So treat the interview like an authentication process, and and as in cryptography, authentication requires trust. Behavior that violates trust increases risk. So now we're kind of going back to the risk of the manager. You're trying to mitigate the risk the manager has to own to consider you for the position. Anything you do to increase that risk is going to make it harder for them to extend an offer to you. Or it's going to raise the risk. It still might be affordable, but it's going to raise the risk, which you don't really want to do. So, some of the things I tell candidates is, please be direct, truthful, honest, transparent, humble. And you really have to be on the manager's side. In fact, you and the manager are on the same side looking at the problem, asking, what is it going to take for this project to be successful? We could do this, well, we have to worry about this issue here, and we have to bring it to market by August, otherwise, we're not going to beat the Christmas rush. If you're thinking about the process interactively, it's no longer an adversarial relationship between you and the interviewer. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in an interview and I felt like I've had something to prove to a manager, that I've had to convince them why they should give me a job, why they should hire me. And it's useless, it's pointless. It's not helping him understand what is the impact to his project to hire you and give you an offer for that position. So, as far as authentication goes, you have to be as truthful and honest and transparent, and you have to keep that trust level very high. So now we get to the guessing game. The guessing game, the next best thing to speaking the truth. I used to think it was, again, really, really valuable. I thought if I didn't know what the right answer was, that the next best thing was to guess. And there's a lot of things it does more damage on than seems apparent on the surface. So let's look at some of those things. The interview is not a test. I thought I had more bullet items for the damage. It might be a little later, but treating the interview like a test, like it's a pass or fail process, is dangerous. We'll get into what I call managing ambiguity and being able to answer questions that seem totally useless. Things like, how do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? Or what do you do if somebody on your team is having a conflict with another person? Or how do you deal with conflict? Or why do you want to work here? I mean, what's the right answer? Well, it depends. And that's what I consider managing ambiguity. We'll be getting into that soon, but the 10 questions and 2 guesses. So let's say that there are 10 questions that you're going to be asked. 8 of the questions you answer without hesitation, with enthusiasm, with confidence, and you get them right. Perfect. You're a stellar candidate so far. Now the last 2 questions that you get asked, you again answer with enthusiasm, with confidence, without hesitation, but you get them wrong because you're guessing. Well, normally people think, but the guessing part, well, all it means is you got those wrong. But if you think of it from the trust relationship or the risk aspect from the manager, how does the manager know of the first 8 questions that you answered correctly, which ones of those that you were guessing at? Like, it actually will damage the results that you've done so far if you guess in the interview.
But the manager doesn't know that you're guessing. The manager just knows that you got 2 out of 10 wrong.
Right. But you, instead of saying I don't know, you chose to answer that question, so he knows that you're guessing.
He might interpret an attempt at a guess as an attempt into fooling him that you know something you don't know.
Or that you believe something that's actually erroneous, which would be worrisome in a client. Oh, they think that? Well, that could be, or in an applicant. If they think that, they really are off base. Yeah.
But then there's the aspect that's most damaging in a small Microsoft, like high-tech project team, is that, so you give an answer from day to day, right? There'll be hundreds and hundreds of questions. How does he know when you talk to him and give an answer that you sound the same as, and you guess, and in the real world, how does he know the difference? How does he know your level of certainty of the information? So if you say to him, well, I don't really know this very well, but here's my best guess, then at least you're telling him the truth about your understanding. Right? If you say to A, B, C, and you're wrong on C, then when he's working with you and you say A, B, C, how does he know?
Well, I guess there's a difference between guessing and saying that you're guessing.
Yes.
And the latter case, which is really what I would call pathological, where I'm guessing, but I'm going to pretend that I like it.
That's what he very specifically described.
Right, with that specific example, that from the manager's perspective, he's reading all those other elements of your body language and your delivery, and you're trying to communicate something that's not true. That's going to break down, and that trust, it's going to be acidic to that. So there's some other potential problems for this too. I might have it on the next bullet point. Okay, actually, yes, okay. When a manager is going to be asking these questions, if you decide to guess at a question that you think you know, let's say that you know at the very surface level what something is. Maybe all he asks you is, do you know about JavaScript? Okay, kind of simple, but and if you say yes, but you don't really know that, you're probably thinking, well, I hope he doesn't ask me any more questions about that, right? Well, no, you can be sure that he's going to go, oh, great. Okay, well, can you tell me, how do you go about removing, local variables when you do a postback in Ajax or something? And now all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, no, I just spent last night reading up on it before the interview today, and in fact, I don't have any idea what that is. What managers will do is they will ask you a question that you should not know the answer to calibrate you. He needs to know what it looks like when you don't know something. If you can communicate that to him, then he knows when you do know something, this is what you look like, and when you don't know something, this is what you look like. It's subtle, but it's important. And managers will, if you've ever been on an interview where he's drilled in on something until some point where you've had to give up, you might feel like, okay, well, I got the question wrong. Totally not the case. He just needs to know that you're humble enough to say, I don't know, that you're clear about what it is that you do know and what it is that you don't know, so that you could participate in normal operations. So calibrating the candidate is extremely important from a manager's perspective. Also, for those of you who are going to be interviewing other candidates, this is a good strategy. These are good ways to tell whether or not a candidate is being truthfully honest. You know that Seinfeld episode where George does everything backwards and he tells the girl that I live at home with my mom and and I'm 35 and balding, and she's like, great, well, when do you want to go out? It's managers who trust you will want you to work with them. It seems weird. I mean, there were interviews that I went into where I didn't want the job. Have you guys ever had that experience? You didn't care about the job, and they gave it to you like nobody's business. They wanted you to come. The more you said no, the more they were like, okay, well, now you're really the right guy, because you know how difficult this job is, you know what it's going to take to do this work, and only somebody who refuses the position is qualified to have it, So, so if you go in and you're like gung-ho, this is my dream job, this is what I've always wanted to do, chances are you have no idea what it really takes to do that job. I'm not saying that go in and just always play down positions and what you want, because there is an aspect of somebody being enthusiastic and wanting to do that kind of work that's important, but just as far as keeping the trust level high, don't guess in the interview. It's not helping. Now, I already gave you the story about the teams of really good guessers. Projects, for me, I had thought of all these other reasons why I shouldn't guess in the interview, but I still couldn't convince myself not to guess until I realized that managers don't make hiring decisions based on how good a guesser you are. So, because projects have never been successful because they were made up of really good guessers. Okay, now, over 10 years, I collected a book like that big of all the interview questions I ever got, reverse a string, search for a substring within a string, implement in-order tree traversal for a binary search tree, and do it recursively and then iteratively, and then what's the complexity of this algorithm. I went through and I memorized like the best answer for all these questions. Okay, this is not the right way to do it. One of the reasons why is because there are many ways to do it. I was interviewing this one candidate, and he had done really good. I had gone through all the other questions. What's inheritance? What's polymorphism? What's encapsulation? Let's talk about COM and the interfaces.
You don't need Python?
Pardon?
All things you don't need in Python?
Right. Well, it was for a Microsoft position, obviously, so it had to be more complicated than, no, I jest. That's for the camera. But I asked him all these questions. He'd done really good, textbook answers for a lot of his things. And I felt pretty much okay. We ended a little early, but I had a couple more minutes left. So out of the blue, I just asked, okay, what are the advantages and disadvantages of choosing an array over a linked list as your fundamental data structure? And his answer to me was, oh, a linked list, that's the best. I use a linked list for everything. In fact, I don't know why we even need arrays, because linked lists are so great. At this point, I was like, wow, I was just about to hit the, he's totally good for the job, let's submit him over to the manager. And I realized, well, thank you for calling. Really appreciate the time you're taking today, and recruiter will be getting back to you.
Blew a tire on the last lap.
Dude, blew a tire, yeah, like in cars. I just bought that for my iPhone. I have it in my pocket, but yeah, I mean, he blew it on the last thing. And that's when I realized that even the most primitive questions are really effective at qualifying a candidate's ability to communicate, to be truthful, honest, and to understand kind of their level of understanding about whatever the topic was. For someone to talk in that way surprised me, and in fact, I remember doing that in an interview. Before I really understood data structures and algorithms, because I don't have a computer science degree, I didn't learn a lot of this stuff in college. I learned it over, working at Microsoft, but a lot in the last 3 years. But then I remember telling a manager, like, well, I just want to find a reason to always use binary search trees or quad trees or linked lists. I thought they were really, really great, but they're appropriate under certain circumstances, and that's what he failed to communicate in the interview. So again, I want to hit on managing ambiguity. What is the right data structure to use? It depends. What's the best way to get from your house to the grocery store? I actually started asking that question in technical interviews because I got to see, whether or not the candidate would go, well, I'd go out my driveway, take a right, and there, I'd be right at the grocery store. And I'd be like, okay, well, you didn't ask me what grocery store. You didn't ask me if you even had a car to drive. You didn't even ask me, like, what were the requirements, the priorities, the things that you would normally qualify at the beginning of any project. What are the needs? So, getting back to the memorizing the answer, because we'll get to that. Memorizing the answer when you don't, when you know the question, memorizing the answer causes you to be rigid, inflexible, and fragile. And what would happen is I'd write the solution on the whiteboard for one specific way to do an algorithm, and then the manager would be like, well, can you do it another way? And I'd be like, why? This is the best way. This is the fastest. Or, look, I did it all in one line. I didn't even do a character turn. So don't memorize the answers. It's,
sorry.
Yeah.
It's also impossible memorizing answers because as soon as if they think they're getting canned answers to canned questions, they'll change their questions. Because they don't want to know if you got the answer. They want to know if you can think, if you can think out loud, basically.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, because I had an interview that was like, it was, reverse the order of words in a string. And I was like, oh, I've done this one in interviews before, and, so I was like, it's like you're excited problem. The guy's like, okay, show me. So, I did it, and he's like, now why did you do it this way?
Exactly.
So you can still ask the same question, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
You expect different results out of the people.
They're not trying to look up the answer in your brain, they're trying to evaluate your thought processes. So the question, the follow-up, the real question at that point is, why did you do it this way?
But I never understood what they meant by, thought processes. What does it mean when a manager wants to understand, your problem-solving skills? What does that mean? It never meant anything to me. In fact, I'd get in the interview and I'd think, well, I've got the answer. Isn't that what you wanted? It shows that I understand this concept and I've got the answer. But it isn't.
Confusing the interview with school, right?
Right, exactly. When you treat the interview like a test, which we're all kind of conditioned to do, you will forego the normal process of gathering requirements and then doing a little bit of design and analysis, prototyping, do some pseudocode, and then finally get to your implementation, and then do your testing and then delivery. So that's what a manager wants to see, and he wants to see how you do the entire process, not just the implementation. That's what's really fascinating. So, memorizing the questions, you would need to ask, well, okay, don't memorize the answers. Memorize the questions you would need to ask to manage the ambiguity. Okay? So if I asked you, what's the best data structure to use? It depends. What might it depend on? What's our data set look like? What kind of collection do we have? What are our performance goals? What's the minimum size the collection might ever be? What's the maximum size? What's the average size? Is this collection ordered in any way? What type of operations are we doing on it? Is insertion only, deletion, just searches? There's so many questions that qualify that you can't just give an answer. Now, when you ask a question, don't you feel a little kind of like vulnerable? That, okay, well, if you're asking a question, that means you don't know what the answer is, right? I mean, obviously, if you knew the answer, you'd give him the answer immediately. Or you think, okay, well, the manager, and this is what I always thought, that the manager, I thought the manager wanted to see just my raw knowledge for a particular topic and how quickly I could answer it without ever asking the question. I thought everybody who got a job at Microsoft was a genius. I thought everybody had, knew everything. You're right, it's definitely not true. So, then what is it then that managers qualify candidates on? And obviously I think it's really more about managing ambiguity. So now I want to talk about the I don't know, and yet I might be qualified. Basically, you need to be able to say I don't know, because just because you can't answer all the questions doesn't mean you're qualified. And you need to feel comfortable saying I don't know. And Don't assume you know why the manager might or might not hire you for a position. This is one thing that I really fell in a trap about. I went into one position, it was for the, at Microsoft as a developer for the antivirus group. They had just acquired the company from Europe, and I was interviewing on the team, and midway through the interview, they switched tracks on me, because I had a testing background, I was really strong in testing, but I was really good in development too, but there was something about the way I was answering the questions I was more akin for test in their perspective, from their needs. That's what they could utilize about me in this position. So the test manager comes into the room, and one of the first things she asks me is, well, what do you think about test? And I'm like, well, actually, I think that where I'm going to be able to contribute the most is in development, because that's what I want to do. You know, at this point, the interview was over. Yeah, I had it. I finally was within reaching distance of that brass ring. I've been going on that merry-go-round for 10 years, and I'd finally almost gotten there, and I just pushed it away, and I thought what was best was what I wanted, not what the team wanted and what the team needed. And that was a really important lesson for me. So, okay. The first question you get in the interview is the most important question you are going to get in the interview, okay? What have you been up to lately? Sometimes they say, tell me a little bit about yourself, or you know, what were you doing on your last job? But in all forms, what they are trying to identify about you is your ability to talk about what you were doing most recently. Do you guys end up going home and you're just about to have an interview, and you go out and you're practicing your coding questions, you might be even picking up some new technologies because that's what the position requires, and you want to make sure that you can hit the ground running. Well, all the while, one thing you haven't been doing is reviewing what it is that you should already know about this position, or you know, about your skill sets. And when candidates cannot talk about their previous work experience in excruciating detail, then that trust level dives and risk goes way up, and a manager's like, wow, you know what? You know, not only did he not know the things that we needed for the position, he didn't even know the things that he should have known on his resume. So one, don't embellish your resume. Don't put things on your resume that you can't talk about in detail. And you need to be able to go into way more detail than you could ever imagine, just because when you can, it qualifies you for the position. Actually, I have a couple slides coming up that cover this, but candidates can get hired based solely on their ability to answer this question. Okay, a manager, if you've read the book, The Tipping Point, you know, is it The Tipping Point? Yeah, it's like that moment, or Blink, you know, there's this moment where you think, okay, manager's gonna hire you based on your handshake or your smile or how well you know, talk about the Mariners on the way to their office. It really doesn't happen like that, and managers can't afford to base their hiring decision on those first couple moments. But what they can base it on is your ability to talk about your previous work experience. So they can have a high level of confidence about your skills when you can talk about that in detail. So one of the other things that sets the mood for the rest of the interview, the manager doesn't want to ask you questions you don't know the answers to. There's no way that he can interpret what you don't know as a way to infer what it is that you do know. So don't spend any time talking about what you don't know. Spend as much time talking about what it is that you do know. And this little kind of equation here, breadth and depth equals enthusiasm and passion. When a candidate can go into detail and can go back a very long you know, period of time on their resume to be able to talk about it without ever looking at it, what it means to me is the candidate's enthusiastic about that work. They remember what they were doing. Now, I've had some pretty crappy jobs that I've worked on, and I'm glad I don't remember what happened on those positions, you know. But I was trying to embellish there. But the enthusiasm and passion really do map directly to a candidate's ability to talk in detail and to talk about as much as possible that's on the resume. And what we ended up finding was that candidates, you know, they might not, if they didn't pass the interview or get an offer by the first, second, or third time, we found that by the fifth time the candidate would get an offer. Now, okay, let's step back and look at that. Is that because the candidate was really, you know, finally figured out the questions that managers ask, or is it because the recruiter finally figured out what type of positions to submit the candidate to? Neither of those cases. What we found was the candidates, by the fifth time that they've interviewed, they might have each position that they've interviewed, they might have met with 4 or 5 people. That's 20 times of answering the first question. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What have you been up to? By that 20th time, you're really good at just rattling off what it was you were doing. No hesitation, confidence. It's a no-brainer. It's effortless for you. That communicates so much to a manager about your skills. Okay. If you can't remember it, then it probably wasn't important to you. You know, that's kind of what my rule of thumb here for that is. All right. Oh, and you know what? It's funny. Of all the questions that you can get asked in the interview, this is the only one you can't get wrong. There's no right answer, right? I mean, they can't sit there and go, well, in fact, no, you didn't do that, or no, that's impossible. There's no way you could have done that. But it's, if you are unable to communicate what it was that you were doing and go into detail, yeah, of all the questions that you're getting wrong, it just, anyways, makes my brain hurt. So, okay. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Okay. Don't talk about the project or team. I'm looking at the clock here and I see that we have about like 10 or 15 more minutes. And one of the things I wanted to get to was what I call the whiteboard development environment. For the developers here, that's really killer because it basically applies the software development lifecycle to a form or structure on the whiteboard that can help you demonstrate to a manager you're agile, that you can put test-driven development first, that you can manage the details and you have a structured, methodical way of presenting it. I'm afraid we might not get to that before it's over, so we could move out to another area if that's necessary. But back to this, don't talk about the project, the team, or the company.
Why is that? Why I think talking about the project is totally acceptable, and actually, especially if you're showing enthusiasm for it.
Because of the second bullet point here. The manager doesn't want to hire the team. He doesn't need to know about the company. He's not hiring the company. He's hiring you.
Wait,
Yeah.
he wants to know also about your situational awareness. So basically, like if you've been working for a company that made antivirus software and I'm hiring you to write a web browser, I don't really care about antivirus software, but I do care an awful lot about whether or not you knew what you were doing and who you were working with at your
Now,
workshop.
okay, being specific, you said what you were doing, what the candidate was doing, not what the team was doing. A lot of people are like, well, the project was this. The company is a multi-million-dollar company, and we were working on shipping next generation antivirus software. And then he goes, well, what did you do? He'd be like, well, actually, I was just the paper boy. I just cleaned the offices or something.
Well, what was your role? What was your role in it, and did you understand in the last position what your contribution was?
That's extremely important, but it's specifically what was their contribution. And when candidates fall into the trap of talking about the project and the team and not starting the sentence off with, I was responsible, I owned this area, the deliverables that I delivered were these, the dependencies that I was impacted with were these. Those are the things the candidate needs to communicate. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying.
I think it's sometimes worthwhile to talk about these things in order to provide the context for the work that you did.
I think once you've established the context, if I had some significant impact on the project, I think it is still a great value for some person to say, I worked on this project and here's why I loved it, and we did all these awesome things, and if you talk about the project with enthusiasm, then
You're
it's
saying we as opposed to...
Right.
Well,
that's the problem.
What part about showing that you work well with the team is bad?
No, that's not what working well with the team means. I used to think it did.
No.
Working well with the team.
Showing enthusiasm for a project almost, I would guarantee, means that you worked well with the team. Because if you hate your team, you hate the project.
If you couldn't contribute to the project, you might still have been enthusiastic about what it was you were doing. If you were a liability and increased the risk of the project's success, you might still have really loved the job and been enthusiastic about it. So you can't base...
if I may?
Yeah.
The particular way you're phrasing it, I think is triggering some people
Okay.
to thinking you mean something that you don't. And it's also possible that your being with Volt for so long is skewing your view a little toward lower level individual contributors. Okay? Rather than to, if I was hiring a project manager, I'm not sure how many I's and me's I'd want as opposed to we's.
Hell yeah.
Let's look at program managers for just a second.
I think I know what he means. He wants to make it clear that you're filtering out what this particular person contributed versus, that's like, you know, we made the 747 airplane versus I punched rivets. You want to know what this guy's role was in the act. That the role was punching rivets, But you also, and that's fine, you want to get that piece of information, but another piece of information that hiring manager is looking for is plays well with others. How did this person interact? If he's delivering his deliverables, to whom is he delivering it?
Mm-hmm.
Is he delivering what was requested?
Mm-hmm.
Is he delivering something useful? Does he know that? Does he keep track and pay attention to
the bigger
whether or
picture?
not what he is actually doing with his hands
Mm-hmm.
is going to help the plan come out?
I totally agree. And there's the questions that I ask candidates to qualify them in those areas is more about understanding how their contributions affected or contributed to the success of the project. You know, that's the level of abstraction that I think is necessary. But I get candidates all the time that always say we. They never say I. You know, and I'm like, okay, well, I had a candidate, I was prepping this candidate over the phone, and she kept saying we, and then I go, but you mean I? And she says, yes, I, and she'd start it again. And it meant something different to me as the receiver to hear her say with conviction, I was doing this. That means a totally different thing than we were doing this. There are times when I would say we when I was a candidate, and I was kind of trying to make it a little ambiguous. I was trying to not make it as clear that I wasn't as useful as I wanted them to think I was. So don't use we, use I for that. Talk about yourself and your contributions you made to the success of your previous projects, and think of that question, what have you been up to lately, as describe how you contributed to the success of your last project. Kind of fundamental, it kind of seems like an obvious thing, but when you're in the interview, it really takes a moment for you to commit to describing how you did that. Okay. And like I said a moment ago, talk in the first person, use I, not we. Oh, and oh yeah, this is one interesting thing. Teach the interviewer to do your job. If you can remember how to do your job and you're communicating it to them in such detail that as if you were doing a brain dump and they were coming in to replace you in the position, that's the level of detail you're looking to communicate to them. That means you're enthusiastic, you're passionate about the work, and you want to you wouldn't mind doing it again. In fact, managers hire you based on what you've done in the past. And if you can't remember what it is you've done in the past, how is he going to be able to leverage that in a new position? You'll have to learn it all over again. So, I mean, it's not as black and white, but you get where I'm going. Okay, so standing out, separating yourself from the pack. The one attribute about you that will make you stand out from the crowd will be your ability to talk about your past experience in a great amount of detail, depth, breadth, saturation, and color. It's, you know, candidates who can't, there's a lot of those candidates. It's the fact that you can talk about your work in detail that qualifies you for that position. Avoid generalizing. Avoid, you know, making these broad brushstrokes of statements about what it is that you were doing. The more specific, the better. Don't be vague. And talk in detail because you can. Because you can. Okay, consider two candidates. I have one candidate, he talks in generalizations, and he doesn't have the experience. Now I have this other candidate, he also talks in generalizations, but he does have the experience, but he doesn't want to bore the manager's time. You know, why would the manager want to know about what I was doing writing my you know, nonfiction books in my literature class, or some short story form or something? Why would he care about that? Because if you can talk about it in detail, it shows that when you do work that you're passionate about it, you remember doing. You just don't take a job because it's going to pay you the money, even though kind of that's what we think we need. He's not going to hire you based on that. So talk in detail because you can. It qualifies you for that position. Okay. I will go quickly here. So questions in their two forms: scenario-based questions, you know, or behavioral questions, or the other types of questions, the knowledge questions, which are kind of terms and definitions. The behavioral questions are more of the, you know, how do you know when a project is ready to ship? I love this question. This if you're working at Boeing, how do you know when the plane's ready to go out? Well, if they can describe to you, well, it depends. You know, do you know this about, you know, have we met the schedules and deadlines here? What's the quality that we've met? Are we, you know, what are the metrics we're using to measure the product? If they start asking those kind of questions, you understand that they have that experience and that qualification. Another great question I like to ask is, what do you do if there's a conflict on your team? You know, anybody here know what to do if there's a conflict on your team? You've all been asked this question, right?
Lie to the interviewer?
Like, right,
No good answer.
embellish, maybe? No.
Yes.
Guess?
What kind of conflict, I guess? Ask more questions, what kind of conflict do you mean?
Fantastic, okay, excellent. And how do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? You've gotten that question before?
Yeah.
Totally.
What,
I've gotten it all the time.
if I said rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 and C, if you chose 8, does that really mean anything? It seems ludicrous, doesn't it? You've missed the point of the question. The point of the question is for you to come back and say, well, it depends. If you're talking about somebody who can do simple procedural programming and functions, I'm an 8. If you're looking for somebody who has experience developing a well-structured object-oriented design, you know, I've never done any of that, so I'm probably a 2. Well, if you're talking about, actually that was C, so let's move it to C++.
Design C, that's pretty effing amazing.
Yeah, my name's Bjorn Strustrup. So, but if you need to qualify the question, you think that when the manager shuts his mouth, that's the end of the problem, and that you have to give an answer, stand and deliver, or the interview's over, you're mistaken. You have to qualify the requirements. You really have to get the manager to participate in this discussion. You're demonstrating your ability to communicate when you get on that job. Somebody's going to come down the hallway and go, hey, we don't know what to do. The servers have gone down. What should we do? Well, you probably say, well, what server is it? How important is it? When did it go down? How long has it been down? What are the possible scenarios you've thought of? What's the lowest risk scenario? What's the highest? You really like jump through the hoops to make sure that you're not the one answering the question. You're just enabling them to understand the points that are going to affect what their final decision is. When you're in the interview and you're asking that question back to the manager, well, what's the priority? What's the severity? You know, what's the focus? You're demonstrating that you have the ability to manage ambiguity. Again, I'm coming back to that manage ambiguity. So how do you get from your house to the grocery store? We kind of went through that a moment ago. How would you design Bill Gates' bathroom? Anybody get this one before? Yeah, this is in the office group. They really like to ask this question of program managers.
You want a big toilet, the biggest asshole in the world.
That will definitely get
You know, you wouldn't get hired because of the answer. You get hired because you never asked a question. A program manager is a program manager is a reflection of what the needs are of the customer. And if the program manager isn't asking, you know, well, what does the customer want? What does the customer need? That's why you wouldn't get hired. So, but you see where I'm going. This qualifying unset requirements is really important. So. It depends. The right answer depends. Let me put it this way. The most appropriate answer depends on many different factors. If you can enumerate those factors, you're demonstrating to a manager that you have the fundamental skills to solve problems in an arena where everything's ambiguous. You don't know what all the factors are, and you don't know when somebody comes up to you, you know, what should we do? You can handle those situations. So that's why I say here, the ambiguous question, the right answer depends. So start off your answers with the phrase, it depends. One, it keeps you from polarizing. It keeps you from painting yourself into a corner. And at dinner, I was asking, it was Adam and Pierce, yeah. We were talking about this question, you know, starting your answer off with the phrase, it depends, doesn't paint yourself into a corner. And we were asking about books, and I said, well, what is it, how do you write a good book? And he started explaining to me, well, you do this, you make sure characters have really strong and detailed background, and it's rich with information. And I was surprised that he didn't say, well, it depends. What type of book are we writing? You know, what's the goal of our material and our literature that we're writing? And if you would have just started off with the phrase, it depends, it gives you the sandbox, or, you know, gives you the foundation to engage in considering multiple solutions, because weighing the advantages and disadvantages of one solution over another is way more important than if you just gave an answer and said, well, this is the right answer. these are really, really important things. So qualify unsaid requirements. Qualify the context of the question, and therefore it really requires you to ask questions. Yeah.
Also, one thing to say about that is that you're just not qualifying unsaid requirements. The fact that you recognize that there's unsaid requirements, that's
Exactly.
the big part.
Yes.
Realizing that you could possibly be making assumptions.
Right. Killer thing to do is, and what I mean killer in a bad way, is making assumptions. Just like guessing, making assumptions is a really bad thing. I totally agree with you, Adam. So talk about what you do know, not what you don't know. Again, the manager can't make a hiring decision based off of what you don't know. He can't assess the risk to his project based on what it is that you won't be able to contribute to the team. And weigh the advantages and disadvantages of one solution over another. One other thing here which is nice is describe what you're not considering and why. Your ability to enumerate why you might have passed up on one solution is illuminating about what you know about the process. You might think, oh, well, if I gave what I would consider to be the wrong answer, then it means I'm not going to get a job. It's kind of the opposite. You need to be able to describe what you're not considering and why. It really will tell a manager a lot about what's going on inside your head. And feel comfortable offering up average solutions. You think in the interview that you have to impress a manager, you have to work overtime and talk in absolutes, which never talk in absolutes. Never. But it actually depends. So feel comfortable offering up average solutions. It really is an okay thing to do. Just provide the context. It's really important. Okay, I think I can end on this slide by saying that some of the problems with candidates is it's not that you can't think of one solution. In fact, the problem that you have as a candidate is you can think of too many solutions and you're just not sure which one is the right one. And either you have to qualify requirements to call out the most appropriate answer, or you're going to have to make assumptions. If you make assumptions, that's really bad. So don't make assumptions. It's really bad. And don't assume the general case. If a manager left the question to be generic and he didn't qualify the details, don't assume that you have to answer the question at that level of abstraction. Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, in what area, in what specific thing? And if you start enumerating those things, it gives the manager more opportunity to talk about the things that you do know, and it helps you to avoid talking about the things that you don't. Don't be afraid to ask questions, it's not a test, and avoid talking in absolutes. I kept changing the word avoid from never to avoid, never to avoid. Okay. And this was kind of a key thing for me when I realized this, was that developers don't write code, they manage ambiguity.
We do write code.
Well, but they pay you to manage ambiguity. There's so many ways to write a solution to any one problem that a really skilled developer will understand more subtle attributes and requirements to a problem, that it's not just about the final code that you write. It's about all the rest of those skills. So, identifying the most appropriate answer. Managing ambiguity is about identifying the most appropriate solution given the constraints, priorities, context, scenario, requirements, and dependencies and deliverables and all those other things that are important in a project. So I'll end here by saying that answering questions in an interview is more about the questions you ask than it is the answers you give that demonstrates your ability to manage ambiguity. So I'll end there. We have about 4 more minutes before 8. Yeah, question?
That last sentence was the most important thing you said in the whole. I interview a lot, and I think I'm good at it. I'm better at convincing people that they need to hire me than I am usually doing the job after 8. But I've been through a lot of technical interviews, and the first thing I always do when I sit down is usually they say, do you want to know anything about the position? And I say, yeah. And then I ask them questions, I try to figure out, usually they're hiring to solve a problem. And I want to know exactly what that problem is. And then I start suggesting solutions. And if the interview goes well for me, they're never even ask about my resume, or the last job I was on, anything. I ask them about the problem they have, and then I start posing possible solutions to it, and an hour later, they're basically saying, well, you'll be hearing from us.
Yep.
And that's when it works, that's how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be a convicted felon, they wouldn't care. You know? In fact,
You should write a book on how to pass interviews as a convicted felon.
Right. But if you are a convicted felon, it's the only way you can do it.
Yeah. Question?
You used the wrong Ben.
Thank you. Okay, THAN for you asked then? Okay. Thank you. Any testers here? No. I really appreciate you coming. I hope that you got something out of this class. This is just part of actually way more information that I have to share with you guys. It's going to be coming out in my book, Interview Patterns. I've got the domain interviewpatterns.com and .org.net. So I'm going to, when the book is available, it's going to be available through lulu.com, self-publishing on there, and you'll be able to order the book online. If you want to be notified of that, please come back after we finish here and just jot down your email address, and I'll make sure you guys get a notification on that. So thank you.